Time now for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Ertz.
Well, thank you for joining us this week. I am Lindsay Ertz. Let's go inside Utah politics. We begin our program today with more tension between lawmakers and the judiciary. We're hearing now about plans to expand the state Supreme Court early in the general session. Now, this comes as lawmakers continue to express their discontent with the Utah judge's decision to pick a congressional map not drawn by the legislature. Now, here to break down the legal ramifications of that proposal, I'm joined today by leaders at the Utah State Bar Association. We have Executive Director Elizabeth Wright and the President, Kim Cordova. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. Okay. So, Kim, let me start with you as the president of the Utah State Bar. Can you just elaborate the bar's position on expanding the state Supreme Court? How does the bar agree with that?
Yes. Thank you for that question. First of all, I just want to say that in statements that the legislature has made in terms of expanding the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, they have talked about wanting to support the judiciary and wanting to give them resources. And we are, as a practicing lawyer, and the Bar Association, we are really grateful for their support and their partnership and their attention to the plights and the challenges of our judiciary and our court systems across the state of Utah. And when we talk about expanding the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, I think that we also have to look at funding them. It'll cost around over almost $3 million to fund 2 Supreme Court justices and 2 appellate court judges. And so when we look at the government and taxpayer money and the taxpayer money funding all 3 branches of the government, that is an expensive price tag to expand both those two courts, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. And also to consider that the courts also have their own priorities as to what they need money for. And so the courts have to go to the legislature to ask for funding because the legislature, of course, has, controls the purse strings for funding all of the agencies across the state. And the judiciary is one of them. And the priorities that the courts have is for the district courts and for juvenile courts. What the courts really need is help in the district court level and the juvenile court level with judicial assistance and a judge in the 4th District Juvenile Court. And that's based on their numbers and the data and the needs of the court. Realistically, most citizens are going to touch the judicial system. They're going to touch the judiciary in the juvenile court and the district court, not necessarily the appellate courts or the Supreme Court. And so the bottleneck of pressure points in terms of high caseloads and overwork and access to justice is in the lower courts.
Is it? Okay. So can I push you just a little bit to answer, does the bar support expanding it, or are we waiting to see sort of what the proposal is? I mean, obviously you know what the proposal is, 2 on the appellate and 2 on the Supreme Court.
So I think that right now our position is that we would prefer to see those resources, that nearly $3 million, to go to more of the district court level and the juvenile court level in terms of what the courts are prioritizing. I think that if there was no issue about priorities of funding, I don't know if there's necessarily a strong opposition to that, but I think that mostly what we're looking for is the prioritizing the needs of the court.
Okay, Elizabeth, let me have you weigh in here. What does adding these 2 members at the appellate level, because you heard Kim say we really need the district level courts, but what does adding 2 members at the state Supreme Court and the appellate court level do?
Well, it's very expensive, as Kim said, but the legislature has said that there are backlogs, and I think there were some backlogs in the courts coming out of the COVID, out of the pandemic. My understanding now is the court is all caught up, the Supreme Court is all caught up, things are humming along, they're meeting all their deadlines, and that it's not necessary. And as Kim pointed out, the district courts are underwater, and people who need their cases heard, their juvenile case, their divorce, their contract disputes, they're having difficulties getting hearings, and district court judges have, over 1,000 cases. And for the average citizen, those are where the resources should go. And the governor pointed out that our population has grown. I mean, he's obviously right, the population has grown, but the population growth pressure, again, is on the lower courts. And one of the things the the court's top priority for this year was judicial assistants. And they are the workers in the courtrooms that make the courtrooms hum, take care of all the business of the courtroom. They're not paid great, and they have a lot of trouble attracting people and keeping them there. And funding for them would go a long way in helping improve the efficiency of the court. And the appellate court is just not a place where they need efficiency. And in fact, the court reports that by adding Supreme Court justices, it will actually slow the process in the Supreme Court.
How so? Can you explain that a little bit?
There are 5 of them, and it's not an assembly line where one judge is assigned a case and they crank out an opinion. They deliberate and they have to circulate a draft. Somebody is assigned to write the opinion. It gets circulated. Everybody has edits. Maybe after reading what somebody else has added, maybe they want to deliberate again. Maybe they want to dissent. And by adding 2 more people, you are really going to slow down that deliberative and editing process. It will actually slow their process.
Interesting. So, Kim, one of the criticisms out there of the legislature is that they are court packing here, that they're adding 2 Supreme Court justices for more people who may see the way they see on certain issues, particularly redistricting right now. That's top of mind for folks. Does the bar see it that way?
So first of all, I just want to elaborate a little bit on what Elizabeth said about the adding 2 new members to the Supreme Court. Some of the reasoning that we talked about like it would actually lengthen the time for decisions. There is opposition to that, right? There are different perspectives, and we're going to get pushback on that. And so I just kind of wanted to be super transparent about that we know that there's opposition to that kind of line of thinking. For the appellate courts, I think that the way that they decide decisions are a little bit different. And so, so maybe it could, speed up the process in which decisions are made on the appellate court. But again, the resources are needed in different areas of the court right now. And so as far as court packing, we have a really robust and rigorous judicial nominating process. And so for the way that a judge is appointed and then confirmed by the Senate is a really rigorous process that's really focused on merit and not popularity. And so it's a very lengthy application process. It could take anywhere up to 9 months. And there's a lot of vetting. There's layers and layers of vetting through the judicial nominating commissions, and then through different interviews, and then of course the interviews with the governor, and then the selection, and then the Senate confirmation. And so I just think that it's really important that all of the judges that are sitting right now went through that process and have been vetted, appointed, and confirmed by current or past administration governors and Senate.
Yeah, that's interesting. Elizabeth, you mentioned this a little bit, but one of the main arguments from the legislature is we had 300,000 people when we were a state in 1896 and had 5 justices then. Now we have 3.5 million people. I understand the Supreme Court is not representative, right? Like a congressional delegation would be. You wouldn't add members just based on population. But is there some merit to that argument that we need more people because we're a bigger state now, and the majority of states in the country have, I think it's 28 or so that have 7-member Supreme Courts?
I think, again, it goes back to what I said before. I think the population growth pressures are being felt at the lower courts and for the average citizen who wants to get their dispute resolved. I think if the court were behind and we could get beyond the pandemic numbers, they would find that the court is being productive and that it's not an issue right now.
So you guys disagree with the notion that the court is backlogged?
Correct, yeah.
Interesting, because we're hearing that a lot, that we're not getting decisions fast enough. Where do you think that's coming from?
Well, I think one of the reasons that there was the initial backlog is when I was talking about the judicial nominating process and in terms of judicial selection and becoming appointed, that it's a very lengthy process. And 2 of our sitting Supreme Court justices came from the Court of Appeals. And so so they came from the Court of Appeals and had a caseload. And then when they went to the Supreme Court, it took up to 9 months to fill their spot on the Court of Appeals. And so the appellate positions were down. And so those justices were doing double duty. They were working on their appellate court caseload as well as the Supreme Court justice caseload. And so I think that is a factor. Of course, the pandemic is a factor. And so again, I think that as we move along, we move into 2026, that the backload of cases are coming down. And then also when we talk about resources and the population growth, I just want to touch upon that really quick.
Yeah, we have like 20 seconds, so do it quickly.
Utah has a ton of legal deserts, right? Most of the population growth is going to be on the Wasatch Front, and so we have to also look at Utah as a whole in terms of where our gaps for resources are. We're
going to have to leave it there. I know it's not the last conversation we'll have, but I thank you both, Kim Cordova and Elizabeth Wright, leadership at the Utah State Bar Association. We appreciate your thoughts today. Okay, when we come back, Eva Lopez Chavez joins Inside Utah Politics, why she wants to make the jump from City Hall to the halls of Congress. Stay with us.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Ahrens.
And then there were 6. Salt Lake County Councilwoman Eva Lopez Chavez now announced she's running for Congress in the newly drawn House District 1. She joins me today. Welcome, Eva, to Inside Utah Politics.
Hey-o, I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, you announced your run recently.
Yeah.
Just talk to me about why. Why did you decide to jump in the race?
Yeah, well, there's a longer story to this, and it's the same reason why I'm involved with politics and being a representative. I obviously serve as a councilwoman, but it all started with a dream, a 7-year-old's dream, to help protect their family. I come from a family that previously was undocumented, a family that is working class and somebody that's seen their parents struggle. And so as I've gotten the opportunity to represent my district, I finally realized when we saw the new map, we had an opportunity upon us. And after 24 hours of considering, there's kind of a timeline delineation in this, but it took some time. And what I finally came to the conclusion is I asked myself, the very question is, what would I be willing to do to protect my family from harm? And to what lengths would I be willing to go? And I finally concluded that in my own way, running for Congress is the antidote to that symptom, to that question. And so for me, this is an opportunity to share my family story. It's a story that unfortunately we're hearing more and more commonly as we're facing different ICE and immigration raids in our backyard and community. We hear constantly on the news of people going missing, even showing up to their green card or due process in judicial courts and being placed in these vulnerable situations where federal agents are coming in and scooping in. That's the type of violence that I want to combat. I think that's just one stance on this issue, but that's how I came to this conclusion.
Yeah, so talk to me about how you talk in your announcement video about how you're Mexican American, right? And kind of this heritage that you have. How does that translate to getting policy done at the federal level?
Sure, that's just the lived experience. I think people ought to know who their candidates are. We want to make sure that these are folks that aren't going to go to DC and become part of the DC elite or establishment, but are people that we meet every day in our backyards. So I share that so that folks can know a little bit about me. But I do think it translates directly into policy, whether it's immigration policy, whether we look at international policy, which right now we don't have a framework really, other than whatever the federal government, our president wants to respond to. But for me, these are working class issues. You hear a lot about that, but I'll tell you what working class is. It's making sure that people have preventative health care so they don't have to worry about going to the doctor's office because they're already sick, but making sure that they keep up with health. It means having access to home ownership opportunities, keeping FHAs and keeping mortgages at a rate that is actually amenable or attainable really. Making sure that women have reproductive health care, but more specifically that all people have access to health care. And of course, I talked about immigration, but making sure that we talk about livable wages, and most importantly, that we talk about infrastructure. That's really important. I imagine myself, Lindsay, working with a delegation, both Democratic representatives at the House, helping bring really good infrastructure funding to Utah, making sure it's not bad infrastructure funding. Right now, in the last bill cycle that was passed, we had federal delegation asking and working with the state to bring in funding for an ICE facility to be built in West Valley City. That will completely change and undermine the actual physical lived experience, not just for West Valley, but for the whole district and for the state of Utah. That's not the type of message that we want to send to the nation. I know Utah especially, we care about our families. We care about having a pathway to compassionate and legal citizenship. And I believe firsthand, I'm the only candidate that can talk about those issues and provide a pathway for policy to exist.
If this map sticks, you, and if you were elected and make it through your primary and all those steps, right, just assuming all those things, you would have to work with 3 Republicans,
yep,
right, in the federal delegation, because those seats are largely held by Republicans. What's your philosophy on working bipartisanly, that's not a word, but bipartisanship and working across the aisle? Because to your point, you're going to be deadlocked a little bit with these Republicans, and you may have to stick to your guns. You may have to make some hard decisions.
I'll tell you what, Lindsay. There's one thing that the whole delegation, and once I am able to win, and I'll be back on the show, you know I will, but genuinely speaking, there's something that we miss there, and that is that we're all Utahns. And better yet said, I'm interested in telling the story of Utah. I know where we're going to be at a standstill, and my colleagues will know and hopefully appreciate that I've got the backbone to stand up to a president that doesn't care about what type of people are being deported today, doesn't care about missing children or the violence that's being inflicted upon our communities, that only cares about those that, quite frankly, are gifting him personal favors. And I want to have a conversation about how we overcome the corruption in our country. I have a policy plan that I'm rolling out. I call it the anti-corruption plan, inserting term limits, making sure that we don't have corporate PAC money, and continuing oversight in funding, and making sure that we are accepting these gifts and we are excessively hurting our own elections or undermining our own democratic processes. These are the types of conversations that Utah needs to be having, because I actually believe Utah is a great example to the nation of making sure we have compassionate policies for families, making sure that we have judicial processes that serve justice, but equally so those economic opportunities all the way from home ownership to starting a business and being an entrepreneur. These are things that Utah stand for.
I want to get back to some of those affordability issues in just a second, but I hear that you have an announcement or an endorsement that you recently picked up. I don't even know who this is. Do you want to share?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Yeah. I really appreciate it. So on my way here, I get a text from my team, and so I put it down, and once I parked, I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, we got our first endorsement. It's Nuestro PAC, which a lot of people in Utah may not know because they haven't been active here. And what's happening, what we're seeing is the announcement went viral on all of these Latino stations. I'm getting texts from DC, from friends from Utah, from college that are working out in other congressional districts. I'm getting calls across the nation from state legislators, other Latino elected officials. This is an example where Utah has a tidal wave, and it's not the way we think it is. I think we forget that we have such a large and growing Latino population that the insider knowledge is, oh, well, you know, it's just another Latino from the west side running or whatever from Salt Lake City. And to the nation, it's, whoa, we're shaking it up. Utah has the ability to elect somebody that's Latino. We're interested in that. We're curious. We have a stake in the game, because Utah is not a top 20 race, by the way. When I'm talking to all these national, gurus, PACs, organizers, operatives, et cetera, they're not looking at us going, well, we don't need Utah to flip the house. We've already got that covered, hon. So what else you got? And I tell them, okay, you know what we have? We have an extremist legislature. And you know, the best message we could send to the country right now is actually to talk and lead the nation on these issues, because I know that Utah is actually very friendly. And we've seen this in different iterations from our governors, from different legislators, different types of representatives. Heck, the very foundation, 1847, we had migrants, illegal migrants, coming in across the plains, across the mountains, making it here and finding Salt Lake City. It was Pioneer Park where the first camp was. And those are the type of stories that I think are really integrated into my heritage, as well as someone that's Mexican American, first generation. And that's why we've got this endorsement. So that was a nice surprise. Luckily, didn't have to apply for that. These are just people that are finding us out of the woodwork.
Less than 30 seconds in this last question, but give me your top 3 policy changes you want to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Great Salt Lake and environmental preservation. We need to prioritize our watershed and have Western drought on the forefront of our policies. The second one being immigration, of course. That's something that's so pivotal and personal to me. And then the third one, of course, being home ownership, looking at livable wages, what I would call our bundle of affordability and livability policies.
Eva Lopez Chavez, thanks for your time today. Good luck in the race. It's going to be, if these maps stick, I mean, it's going to be a dogfight in this primary in June.
I'm ready to be the dog.
We will be watching. Thank you for joining me today. We appreciate it. All right, coming up still here on Inside Utah Politics, President Donald Trump makes a rare primetime address. Hear how he's summing up his first year back in office. President Donald Trump delivered a rare primetime address this week. He celebrated what he's calling his top achievements in his first year back in office and previewed what's to come. Washington correspondent Vinay Simlot explains.
The president spoke at length about the economy as polls show Americans don't think he's doing enough to lower prices.
11 months ago, I inherited a mess, and I'm fixing it.
As 2025 draws to a close, President Donald Trump delivered a message focused on the economy, starting by blaming former President Joe Biden for leaving him a bad one.
This happened during a Democrat administration.
The rare primetime address comes as an AP poll shows 68% of respondents believe the economy is poor, and 87% say they've noticed higher grocery prices over the past few months.
I am bringing those high prices down and bringing them down very fast.
The president called out what he sees as victories at the border and with crime.
We're deporting criminals, restoring safety to our most dangerous cities.
And he touched on what's seen as his signature economic policy, tariffs.
Liberation Day.
Some economists say it raises prices, and on Wednesday night, the president announced soldiers will share in the new revenue from taxes on imports.
In honor of our nation's founding in 1776, we are sending every soldier $1,776. Think of that. And the checks are already on the way.
But ahead of the speech, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said now is not the time for a victory lap.
Grocery bills haven't gone down. Electricity costs haven't gone down. Housing costs haven't gone down.
Notably, the president did not mention Venezuela once during the address after the military announced another boat strike on Wednesday, and President Trump announced a blockade of sanctioned oil into Venezuela. He's called on the dictator Nicolas Maduro to step down. In Washington, I'm Vinay Simlot. Back to you.
Vinay, thanks. Well, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles is pushing back on extensive reporting by Vanity Fair that presents a candid look at the Trump White House. In that interview, Wiles is quoted as saying President Trump has an alcoholic's personality and calling the vice president a conspiracy theorist, among other claims. ABC's Christian Cordero now has the details from Washington.
She's one of the most powerful people in Washington. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, often sitting just off frame in televised meetings, is in the spotlight today after sharing striking details about the Trump administration in a series of interviews with Vanity Fair. Wiles gave a range of descriptions for members of the cabinet, including telling Vanity Fair the president has an alcoholic's personality, saying President Trump, who has repeatedly said he doesn't drink alcohol, operates with a view that there's nothing he can't do. Nothing, zero, nothing, and compares the president to her alcoholic father. Trump today said he's not offended by Wiles' word choice, telling the New York Post he has a possessive and addictive type personality, reiterating that he doesn't drink. Wiles rarely speaks publicly, known more as the behind-the-scenes architect of Trump's re-election campaign and a fierce loyalist in his inner circle.
Everybody at this table has done a fantastic, and Susie, thank you for doing a great job as our Chief of Staff. First female Chief of Staff in the history of our country, which is pretty amazing when you think of it, right? And she's the best. Thank you very much. Great job.
Wiles calls the article a disingenuously framed hit piece on her and the administration, alleging significant context was disregarded to paint a chaotic and negative narrative. On the Epstein files, Wiles blasts Attorney General Pam Bondi, saying in the article, quote, "I think she completely whiffed on appreciating that that was the very targeted group that cared about this." Wiles tells Vanity Fair the president is named in the Epstein files, but denies he's, quote, in the file doing anything awful, and said he's on the manifest of Epstein's plane, telling the magazine they were, you know, sort of young, single, whatever, sort of young single playboys together. She also says the Epstein files do not have any incriminating evidence of former President Bill Clinton, saying there's no evidence and the president was wrong about that. On Venezuela, Wiles suggests to Vanity Fair the attacks on boats at sea is ultimately about regime change, not drug smuggling. She tells Vanity Fair Trump, quote, wants to keep on blowing boats up until Maduro cries uncle. Christiane Cordero, ABC News, Washington.
Well, thanks for joining us this week, and happy holidays, everybody. We'll see you next week.